Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Administrator. I really appreciate your being here, and I certainly appreciate your patience. We've heard described on this committee and throughout the Congress, frankly, questions about EPA's reliance on faulty and secret science, questions about EPA's transparency and accountability. First of all, I want to thank you for the transparency and accountability the EPA has provided for the volumes of data correspondence that this committee has received. And I'm just curious that sometimes the correspondence asks for information, sometimes for documents or data, as evidenced by testimony, by questions here today. I'm a strong supporter of congressional authority, but I really am concerned about whether we may be overstepping our authority in terms of what we're requiring of the agency. We're just one committee of many who's making these types of requests to the EPA. And so I wonder if you could just tell me how much time and energy is spent by you and your colleagues at the EPA in responding to these volumes of requests.
Congresswoman, we know how important it is to be transparent, and we'll do our very best to respond to any request that Congress brings to us. It is a significant burden in terms of resources, but that's just the amount. I don't mean burden in a negative sense. We want to be open. We want to be responsive. But we receive thousands of these types of requests. We do our best to answer them as expeditiously as we can. I think the times when we've had difficulties is when we've been asked to release data that the EPA doesn't have available to it. Then it becomes an extra effort for us to try to make sure we bridge those gaps with scientists when we fully expect that researchers themselves will access that data as they've always done and work it out that way.
Let me just ask you this, because we've heard some discussion of conflicts of interest. And I can understand, and we've heard testimony in this committee, that when you're forming, when there's peer review done and you're delving into some area of expertise, it's a very narrow area. There are only so many folks out there who have the kind of experience that you can draw upon. Some of those may be in industry. Some of those may be academics who've received grants. When you assess conflict of interest, and I'm just like a cheap lawyer, and so I always thought that the idea behind conflicts is revealing those conflicts, having them assessed, and then making a determination about whether that conflict would prohibit performance, adequate performance, and independence of performance in a peer review situation. Is that how the EPA looks at conflict of interest?
That's exactly how we do that. And you're right. There are opportunities or instances where we have a very narrow expertise that's not represented, that's critical to a thorough look at a science question or a technical question. In that case, we do a thorough investigation. We post the results of that so that people can know the background, and we can make sure that it's balanced, fair, equitable discussion, and then it's as transparent as we possibly can be. And so we do that both for folks who are the scientists as well as folks that bring their history in the industry to the table.
And is there anything necessarily exclusionary, whether a person receives billions of dollars in, or a company in profits from an industry, or whether a person receives thousands of dollars from the administration in terms of doing research? Is there anything exclusionary about that would prohibit service on a scientific advisory panel?
I don't believe so. But what it really means is we must have a rigorous and transparent peer review process. And we must rigorously share that information with the public so they can, before the panel is impaneled, they can offer their suggestions and comments and criticisms, and we can make sure that we have the most robust, fair, comprehensive science available to us.
Thank you. I want to ask you about your work around climate change, because there's been a lot of discussion also. Is it your view from the administration that you have sufficient data to back the work that you're doing around climate change, that in fact it's happening, and that there are certain causal effects that would enable you to do rulemaking in that area?
I believe that I have a wealth of data that is more than sufficient. I believe that the Supreme Court has agreed with me, which is nice.
Great. And so can you tell me about some of the rulemaking that you're engaged in going in that direction, and then relate that to the mission of EPA of protecting our public health and the environment?
Yes, the President's Climate Action Plan identifies mitigation opportunities, reductions in greenhouse gases, as well as addressing adaptation, and then international issues. EPA is to some extent involved in all three. But I think the most important I want to get at is our opportunity to reduce greenhouse gases so we can try to mitigate significant impacts associated with increased emissions and higher levels of climate change. And so what we are really looking at is, first and foremost, regulating greenhouse gas emissions from the power sector, both for new facilities and existing. We have already issued a proposed rule for new facilities, and we're beginning listening sessions and discussions on how we best put out a proposal next June for existing facilities. The reason why we want to do this is that climate change is not an environmental problem. It's a serious public health and economic problem as well as an environmental challenge. And so what happens with a changing climate is that the weather gets hotter. When the weather gets hotter, the ozone levels increase. When the ozone levels increase, your kids go to the hospital more often with asthma. In this country today, 1 out of 10 children have chronic asthma. We are talking about a serious public health challenges. Allergy seasons extend. We are seeing health impacts from different types of mosquitoes and other vector-borne diseases moving north as the weather gets warmer. Things are changing, and things are not changing for the best in terms of public health in a changing climate. It threatens the health, safety, and well-being of communities and individuals. It's something we must address and now.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and thank you so much for the work that you do to protect all of us.
Thank you.